It's Monday, September 19th, 2022. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Senate Staff Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Washington, D.C. with Mr. Ted Hester. Mr. Hester is senior partner and former managing partner at King & Spalding's Washington, D.C. office, where he works in its government affairs and public policy practice. Originally from Richland, Georgia, he graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Georgia and earned his J.D. from Harvard Law School. He practiced in Atlanta for a short time before joining the staff of Senator David Gambrell of Georgia, which, among other topics, we're here to discuss. So, Mr. Hester, Ted, thank you very much for your hospitality and welcoming us to Hester Corner here at King & Spalding in Washington. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you and pleased to welcome you to King & Spalding.
Well, thank you. I wonder, let's start talking a bit about your childhood and upbringing. You grew up in Richland, Georgia, which I believe is in Stewart County. Is that right?
Stewart County, correct.
So tell me about that. What was it? Small town, southwest Georgia?
Very small town, southwest Georgia, Class C high school. I went to school for 12 years at Richland High School, all in one building in one block of Richland, Georgia. Graduated with a class of 17 and had roughly that many, sometimes more. I don't think ever fewer than 17, but
right.
Small classes.
Very intimate learning environment.
But I was totally intimidated going from there to the University of Georgia, and was invited to be in the honors program, which really was a shock to me coming out of this Class C school. But I tell you, in retrospect and pretty quickly, I appreciated that I was about as well prepared as anyone. I was in these classes with students from the elegant private schools in Atlanta, and managed with an awful lot of hard work to hold my own. So
Now, what did your family do? What were your parents involved in?
My father was a car salesman back in those days, in the early 60s. It was not unusual for a small town to have a car dealership and a Coca-Cola franchise, and so all of the, just remarkable number of things that have quickly consolidated into big, bigger units. There was a Chevrolet dealership, Chevrolet Oldsmobile dealership in Richland, and my father was the sales manager there. So,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. So you went to University of Georgia, and what drew you to study political science, of all things?
It's probably just. I evolved there. I had to have a major, even though I was well educated at this small high school where everybody knew everyone, but woefully, I felt woefully deficient in science and math.
Okay.
The notion of doing anything science and math, so I took the bare minimum science and math courses at the University of Georgia.
A man after my own heart.
Yeah, which led me into English, history, political science, the social studies, and after I probably did not declare a major until my second year or so, but I enjoyed those political science courses and continued to spread I had courses all throughout the social sciences, but more in political science. I did enjoy that.
So I was reading, if your wedding announcement is to be believed, you were very active on campus. Did you ever get involved were you involved in student government or anything like that? Or I know you were an independent, you weren't in a fraternity. What sort of activities did you get into in campus? And you had mentioned, Norman Underwood, Judge Underwood, that you were on campus with him at the same time. Who were some of the people that you mingled with and got to know there?
Yeah, my first year I mingled with no one. I had my, I was scared to death, working constantly, nights, weekends, whenever. So did very little. And the notion of joining a fraternity that was totally foreign to me. I had not been exposed to fraternities, sororities. I didn't appreciate them, didn't understand them, and couldn't afford them. I mean, there was no way I went there. I had worked through high school, saving a little money, and Georgia was nice enough to make some scholarship money available to me, but I didn't have any to squander. So freshman year, I kept my nose to the books, and I did remarkably well that first year, which opens the door to those organizations that you're talking about. I forget, the BIFTAD, I think, was a sophomore organization that invited me to join, and that was followed by any number of other organizations. So yes, I was active, including in the Independent Men's Organization, and did meet a number of people. Norman was, you mentioned Norman, Charles Campbell, Buddy Darden, name certainly familiar to you, who were at the University of Georgia when I was there, good friends of mine, and all supportive in the Independent Men's Organization.
And you were Blue Key, of course.
Blue Key.
That goes without saying. So, did you ever get involved in politics while you were on campus? You would have been there in '64 and '66. There were some big campaigns in Georgia, or was that just something that wasn't on your radar?
Once again, I just did not have time, or frankly, the inclination. I didn't want to devote time to campaigns. I had a little brush with politics in '62 before I got to the University of Georgia. This small town had enjoyed Georgia politicians coming through town and speaking on the back of pickup trucks.
Sure.
I remember the year that Ernie Vandiver was elected governor, which would have been
58.
58. Good. Well, I would have been a teenager working in a grocery store in downtown Richland, and I remember going out and seeing a gospel singer named Leroy Abernathy campaigning for election, running against Ernie Vandiver in that. And so I was watching that race, and at least paying enough attention to Georgia politics to be interested in who was running for governor and senator and whatever. Walter F. George was one of the senators at the time from my part of the state.
Right.
And clearly Herman Talmadge would come through and was a force to be reckoned with. The Talmadge family, Herman had not yet made it to the Senate, I guess, but his family was active.
Sure.
His dad had been governor. But in any event, in '62, the first year, I was 18 in 1962, my first opportunity to vote. And Jimmy Carter had come home from the Senate, planted himself back in his hometown of Plains, Georgia, which is 15 miles away from Richland.
Okay.
I remember Jimmy Carter coming by the House campaigning for state Senate. I was in his state Senate district. And my family was very close to the Carters. Miss Lillian Carter's sister lived right around the corner from.
Miss Lillian was from Richland.
Yes, she was
That's
from
right.
Richland.
Okay.
So we knew the Carter family. The problem for me, however, is that running against Jimmy Carter was Homer Moore,
Right.
the father of one of my high school classmates and good friends. So it's, at my first election, obviously how was I going to oppose my good friend's father? And as you know, Homer Moore won that election, so-called, until Jimmy Carter got a little suspicious, retained my later law partner Charlie Curbo to represent him in challenging that election. They found that, I guess, a number of people had voted in alphabetical order from the Louisville Cemetery.
Yeah, who was the political boss? Joe Hearst, I think, was the political boss.
Yeah,
down in there, but that was behind Homer.
yes.
Homer. But I think President Carter wrote a book about that
Yes,
election. I forget the name.
Correct,
But
But
okay.
in any event, that was very interesting. And once again, later in life, I discovered, I didn't know Charlie Kerbo. I had no idea he was representing Carter, but I was just following it through the news. But Charlie Kerbo, my later partner, was representing Jimmy Carter, selected by Carter because Carter's friend from Americus, Georgia, next door, Griffin Bell, had recommended that Jimmy get Charlie Kerbo from Bainbridge, Georgia, who had just recently moved to King and Spalding.
All the characters are getting lined up.
And it continues because Homer Moore was represented by George Busby from Albany, Georgia.
That's right.
And George Busby was later my law partner at King and Spalding. So it was quite fun. In retrospect, putting it all together was quite a coincidence.
You've talked about your law career already a little bit. You were late to selecting a major. When did you decide that law was something you wanted to study and pursue as a career?
I had it in mind, but certainly did not have any commitment, and was not sure I would be able to afford coming out. So it wasn't. But anyway, I did well at the University of Georgia, and my advisors encouraged me to apply to some law schools and ask for financial aid, and was fortunate to get into Harvard with good financial support. So that worked well. Part of that financial support at Harvard was through a scholarship funded by E. Smythe Gambrell of Atlanta, Georgia. E. Smythe Gambrell was a graduate of the Harvard Law School class of 1922, and had succeeded incredibly well financially in the practice of law. He had, he provided the scholarship to Harvard that I was the beneficiary of.
Right.
So,
now, did that put you into contact with the Gambrell family?
It did. That was my initial contact.
That was your initial contact.
Yes, I stopped by when I was home Christmas of my freshman year in law school. I stopped by to thank Mr. Gambrell, meet him and thank him, and he hired me on the spot for my summer, the first summer after out of law school.
And his law firm was?
It was at the time Gambrell, Russell, Kalorin, Wade, and Forbes. It went through several name changes after that.
Sure.
But
you should get a medal though for remembering that.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I worked with them 2 summers and then went to the Gambrell Russell law firm straight out of law school.
Okay, so you come back to Atlanta. What sort of law? I know you practice municipal bond law later on. Is that what you is that anybody's passion? Is what I'm getting ready to say, Ted, or is that just something you find yourself?
Hardly. Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not sure most of us really wind up where we targeted ourselves. We get moved around a bit. I really enjoyed antitrust law in law school. I had a couple of major courses with a couple of the top professors in the country, and so I came out assuming I was going to do antitrust work. I went to the Gambrell Russell firm and was a litigator while I was there, which would have been September 1969 until I left to go to Washington with David Gambrell in February of 71.
Right.
So I was working with litigators in that firm, doing litigation work, and enjoying it very much.
Okay, so it's January 1971. Senator Russell, who's been sick for a while, succumbs to his illness, passes away. When did you find out that David Gambrell, who would have been the chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia at the time, when did you find out that Governor Carter was going to appoint him to the U.S. Senate?
When the appointment was made.
Okay.
I I had known, well, as I indicated, I knew Jimmy Carter, I knew David Gambrell. I was supportive of Jimmy Carter in his campaign for governor in the 70 campaign.
Right.
And had some interaction with David Gambrell. But certainly, Carter, if I remember, Carter waited. He didn't immediately appoint. Russell died, I don't know.
The 21st.
Okay, the 21st of January, and Gambrell was not appointed until February.
Correct. It was well after the funeral, and he had to be flown back, and then there was weather delays and all sorts of.
Yeah. Well, in any event, so there was a period of time there that nobody. There was a lot of speculation.
Oh,
as to
sure,
who might,
sure.
And I had heard the speculation and was intrigued by the possibility that that David Gambrell might be under consideration. But it was not until he was actually appointed that I was aware of it.
So how does Senator Gambrell pluck a young litigator from his father's law firm, and how did he land on you?
Well, if I remember correctly, I did not want to offend Smythe Gambrell by telling him I was leaving his law firm, and I think I approached Smythe Gambrell, the father.
Okay.
Mr. Gambrell, I am so proud of David for getting elected, selected to succeed Richard Russell, and I would be very interested in working with him if that might be an opportunity. And so Smythe Gambrell, I think, made the first call to David Gambrell maybe he was trying to get rid of me.
Well, it seemed to have worked out regardless.
In any event, it was I had those relationships with the Gambrell family so that it fairly easily moved.
Now, how would you describe Senator Gambrell? 50 or so years on, not many people know who Senator Gambrell was, but what was he like as a person, as a lawyer? What was his personality like? Some insights that you can offer somebody who knew him and his family in various stages of life.
Well, I knew who he was, obviously, through knowing the Gambrell family. I knew Smythe Gambrell, the firm I was in. Smythe Gambrell had been president of the American Bar Association and was very active and encouraged the younger lawyers in his firm to be active in bar association activity. So to the extent that politics was, that I was engaged in politics, it was more bar politics than it was.
Which could be equally nasty, I'm sure.
It could be, but David Gambrell had been president of the Atlanta Bar Association probably in the mid-50s or 60s, probably the 60s, I guess. And then immediately president of the Georgia Bar Association, which was, and I think that sort of coincided with Carter's, probably just before Carter's 1966 run for governor, his first run for governor. I recall Gambrell telling me that his relationships through the bar was helpful to Carter, and he Gambrell was serving as campaign treasurer for Carter, so he needed to raise money, and those bar relationships were very helpful in doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, would you call Senator Gambrell a natural politician?
Absolutely not. No.
That's what we call a leading question.
Yeah. He was just a charming intellectual. I don't want to say he was a nerd, but he was more scholarly than he was a politician. I don't know that many people would say he was charismatic. One-on-one, he was extremely charming, very, very personable. Anybody who had a chance to spend time with him really liked him. But no, he was he was a natural bar politician among lawyers.
Well, what issues were important to him? What were his interests when he got to Washington in terms of policy interests and things like that
Well,
that he really took an interest in?
He inherited those interests. He ran into them. He recall that in he was appointed January '71 and served through November of '72. Civil rights was an issue you could not avoid.
Sure.
He was a politician in a conservative state. He was viewed, as was Carter, as a moderate. Carter had gotten elected in '70, but he pretty quickly, I think, began. Some people in the state began questioning whether he was as moderate or as conservative as they thought they were electing a governor, and they immediately tagged David Gambrell as the same. So Gambrell in February '71, brand new senator with no no experience in a political office, 100th in seniority in the Senate, and running for re-election. Had never run for public office before. So he was confronted with an awesome task to both, and he was committed. There was no way he was going to ignore his responsibilities and duties as a senator to devote himself, which, I mean, these days my impression is that an awful preponderance of the people in Washington are far more interested in getting reelected than they are in serving the people of the country. Well, David Gambrell was committed to serving the people of Georgia. He wanted to do a good job. He was moderate on civil rights issues, but limited in a political context that he had to be restrained, obviously, in what he did. So civil rights was an issue that we, I recall probably every day for that period that we were in Washington. We had to be sensitive to the civil rights implications of everything that we were doing. Sure. The Vietnam War was a horrible issue in 1969. I mean, I had lived in 1971. I'm sorry. I had been in law school '66 to '69, and that was when they assigned numbers, draft numbers. We were still drafting people back then, and I had friends in law school who were being drafted.
What was your draft number?
I had been, I don't remember because it was irrelevant. I had been in advanced ROTC at the University of Georgia,
Sure.
So I was ready to go. I was preparing while I was still at Georgia to be in the Army. I enjoyed that. I was brigade sergeant major in ROTC at the University of Georgia, but I had I had to drop out of school after I had been enrolled in ROTC in my junior year with something that was difficult to diagnose. They thought it was mono at first, and then hepatitis, and then I wound up discovering I had a blood issue that made my spleen overactive in collecting blood cells. And anyway, I went through some I was perfectly functional, but nonetheless having to deal with some health issues. So I was discharged. Having gone into advanced ROTC, I had to enroll. I was in the Army and was discharged from the Army, and that basically did away with me in the draft lottery.
Sure.
But in any event, Vietnam, by '71, the country was disenchanted with Vietnam. We had Richard Nixon as president. Nixon was charging into Cambodia, trying to expand the war. The Congress was controlled by Democrats, a fairly liberal-leaning Congress in 71, 72. And Gambrell very quickly, after getting there in 72, was confronted by the Democratic caucus on okay, you know, we are going to introduce a resolution getting us out of Vietnam. And the leadership of the Democratic caucus meant we're getting out of Vietnam by the end of the year. We are quickly getting out of Vietnam. And David Gambrell supported getting out of Vietnam, but not precipitously. He thought it needed to be done on a more responsible basis. So he voted against the Democratic resolution to basically get out of Vietnam, and that was a big issue, obviously, for us to confront.
So are these the issues that you would have been managing as legislative director?
I was involved in every issue that he was involved in. He was certainly spending time every week in the state of Georgia, and he was relying on me to basically keep him
So you
informed.
Stayed up here and worked in the office.
I had nothing to do with the campaign.
So tell me, who else was working on the staff? You've already mentioned some of the names. Charles Campbell would have been a holdover from Senator Russell's office as AA. But who else was on staff with you?
There were a number of holdovers from Senator Russell, and thank goodness we had them. I mean, I came up immediately with David Gambrell. He brought his secretary from his law office in Atlanta, a family friend, Betsy Branch, came up to support me in the legislative area, to work with me in the legislative area. Probably a couple of other folks, but we had the benefit of Charles Campbell agreeing, as Richard Russell's AA agreed to continue serving as David Gambrell's AA. So that continuity was critical, really was. Coming with Charles Campbell, Jim Pinnell, who you have talked to, great friend, Joel Cash Williams, another lawyer who had been on Richard Russell's staff, Joel Williams from Winder, Georgia, affectionately known as the Boomer because of his very booming voice, great singer. And, who else? David Dunning, Georgia graduate from Fort Valley, Georgia. I don't know if he had actually joined Russell's staff, but I think he was in process of coming to Russell's staff. He may have been on Russell's staff.
Okay.
But he was either there or on his way to join the staff.
He works up here now, doesn't he?
He is here now.
That's what I
yeah,
thought,
yeah. Great guy. So
we'll have to talk to David too.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, he's very entertaining.
Great. So, how would you describe the office atmosphere? Some offices, everybody is very rigid. Some very loosey goosey. How would you describe the office atmosphere in Senator Gambrell's?
Somewhere between rigid and loosey goosey. I have never worked in a circumstance that has been rigid. So we tried to be casual and friendly and collegial in what we were doing, and certainly succeeded in that in the Gambrell office. We worked together. I mean, we knew what our job was, and except for the holdovers, particularly Charles Campbell,
right.
we were inexperienced.
Right.
I mean, I had to immediately get up to speed on the Vietnam War and on sort of focus more precisely on the politics of the civil rights issues. Really the biggest legislative issue that David Gambrell had to deal with was the Lockheed loan guarantee.
Right.
In 71, Lockheed was in a bad financial situation itself. It was overextended on the C5 that was being built in
The wings
Marietta.
kept falling off.
That's right. There were problems with the C5, and they had gotten the contract to build and were committed to build the L-1011, which they were building in California, not Georgia. But as they were well into that contract, the engine manufacturer, Rolls-Royce, went bankrupt, which threw the financing for Lockheed in a total tailspin. I mean, Lockheed was going under if they were not able to get a loan guarantee.
Right.
And so that, the Nixon administration, the Republican Nixon administration, the Defense Department, Treasury, John Connally was at Treasury, and I remember Connally. David Gambrell was on the Senate Banking Committee, which was the committee with jurisdiction over the approval of that loan guarantee. So we had, in that first year, in '71, we had probably during the summer, we had a series of hearings in the Senate Banking Committee. John Sparkman of Alabama was chairman of the Banking Committee, and because of Gambrell's constituent interest, he told Senator Sparkman that he really would like to play a lead role, and Sparkman immediately, yes, take it.
Now, was Senator Proxmire on?
Senator Proxmire was number 2 Democrat on the Banking Committee, and as you know, Proxmire was the worst budget, or not worst, but the toughest budget hawk in Congress. And he wanted Lockheed to go down, and fought hard to kill Lockheed against them. So that was fun. I mean, I felt like I was being baptized under fire there. But it was a great experience. We got it through the committee hearings, got a recommendation out of committee. It went to the floor, and Senator Sparkman put David Gambrell, junior most senator in the Senate, in charge of the floor consideration of the Lockheed loan guarantee.
Which would never happen.
Oh, it was unbelievable.
Although I don't even know that it would ever go through committee or get a floor vote in the Senate today.
Exactly.
But
anyway, it was a terrific opportunity for Gambrell politically, and he did a beautiful job. I mean, it was right up in his cup of tea, something that he was at, as a good, solid, smart lawyer, competent lawyer, he was the perfect person to do it. So.
I mean, in the late 60s, early 70s, you're looking at something like 25,000, 30,000 people working at Lockheed.
Big.
I mean, it's still a big employer, but nothing like it was during the Vietnam War era.
No,
so
you're exactly right.
That's a lot of constituents.
That was a really good opportunity for the junior most senator. It put him in contact, with many other senators.
So we're talking about Senator Gambrell, the 100th in seniority, this junior senator who gets this starring role legislatively, going into re-election, a campaign for his own right. So that really meant a lot to him in sort of building a record, apart from just being a placeholder senator. So I was wondering, what was his interaction like with the senior senator, Senator Talmadge? How much interaction did you have, or did Senator Gambrell have with his colleague, and how much interaction did you have with Senator Talmadge's office during that? I assume, especially being an appointed senator, you might have to lean on the Senate colleague, Senator Talmadge, a little bit at least.
No, that's exactly right. If we had not had Charles Campbell and others from Senator Russell's office, we would have certainly been forced to rely on the Talmadge office much more, but we did anyway. David Gambrell had a relationship with Senator Talmadge before he came to Washington. He I think, had been helpful to Senator Talmadge in some of his earlier campaigns.
Sure.
So they had a pre-existing relationship. They different personalities completely.
Certainly.
But but had a very, very pleasant relationship. Talmadge was among those senior Southern Democrats with sufficient seniority to be basically controlling the Senate. He was chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee
Right.
then. Senator Russell had been president pro tempore of the Senate, senior most senator. He was followed by Allen Ellender from Louisiana. Who died that Congress. He died, he assumed that he became number one in 71, died in 72, and Jim Eastland replaced him. So you had this succession of those senior kingmakers, the heart of the civil rights opposition
Right.
in the Senate. So those passings, were sort of a signal that some of the strength of the Southern caucus was abating.
Right.
And Gambrell and several other younger Southerners, Lawton Childs from Florida, Bill Spong from Virginia, and not quite as young, but even Lloyd Benson from Texas. They were a more moderating voice
Right.
among the Southerners. There was the EEOC had to be reauthorized sometime during the Gambrell during the 92nd Congress, and that became a civil rights fight.
Sure.
The Republicans, the liberals, and there were frankly a few liberal Democrats that joined the most progressive Democrats to basically want to give the EEOC more direct enforcement power. And this was just an issue ripe for filibuster. It was an important civil rights issue. Whether or not the EEOC itself was going to have the enforcement authority, or whether it was going to have to go through the court system, through
Right.
litigation to enforce its own dictates. And there was a filibuster. Nunn and others supported the filibuster at the outset.
Gambrell.
Gambrell supported the filibuster when this amendment was offered in its full form. But those Southerners that I mentioned, Childs, Spong, Benson, Gambrell, basically offered an amendment, proposed, we will support this. We will oppose a filibuster to block the reauthorization of the EEOC if you tone it down a little bit. And that passed. He then opposed the filibuster. The bill was considered and passed the Senate and was enacted. So and that was something Gambrell was very proud of, kind of a moderating force.
Sure.
in the civil rights area.
Sort of a transition figure, a younger generation.
Yes.
Skosh more moderate than his predecessor.
Yeah.
I guess the fact that he agreed to vote for cloture made him significantly more moderate than his predecessor.
Yeah.
So, I was wondering, Senator Gambrell, you mentioned several of his Senate colleagues. Did he have any time to make these relationships that among his Senate colleagues that everybody's so famous for, Senator Talmadge making friends with Russell Long and so on and so forth? Was he able to do that? And did he have a personality that lent itself to sort of the cocktail circuit or the glass of whiskey at the end of the day kind of senator?
He didn't quite embrace that glass of whiskey at the end of the day, but he did a remarkably good job. I was very pleased at how well he had developed relationships from his very junior perch, having to be reelected. Nobody knew whether he would ever be reelected, but he developed a number of very good friends. Bob Dole being one of them that was particularly it particularly caught my attention. He and Dole were close and had an awful lot in common. Gambrell had a secret weapon in the relationship area through his wife, Luck Flanders Gambrell. Just a wonderful, wonderful woman she grew up in Swainsboro, Emanuel County, Georgia, in a very prominent family. And anybody who had any contact with Luck loved her. I mean, she was charismatic and charming, and she appreciated how important it was for the two of them to get to know other people. So she did a good job of pulling David out, whether he wanted to or not.
So one of those opposites attract situations. So you were up here in Washington, and we haven't talked about that. What was Washington like in the early '70s for a Senate staffer? Where did you live? What was the atmosphere? What was the environment like here in D.C.?
My life revolved very much around the work that I was doing because I was doing it so constantly. Maybe particularly because I knew that substantively Gambrell didn't want to screw up something and was putting a lot of reliance on me to help make sure that we didn't do anything that would redound to his detriment.
Sure.
I lived in a wonderful little Tudor community on the edge of Georgetown University called Foxhall Village. It was at the intersection of Reservoir Road and Foxhall Road in northwest Washington. We really lucked into a very nice,
it's a very nice neighborhood.
Little townhouse that was, found a townhouse for rent at a rate, at a price that we could afford, and it was good, convenient place to live that I could get in easily.
Right.
So I had the advantage of being a senior staffer, of being able to have a parking place. And in fact, on those days when Senator Gambrell was not in town, I was able to park in the courtyard in his parking space, which was really high cotton.
Oh yeah,
very nice.
Absolutely.
I should mention, by the way, one thing that was very interesting in terms of the life in the Senate is that when we came to Washington, we initially occupied Senator Russell's office.
Right.
We moved into probably the best office that any senator had, the #1 senator's office in the Russell building, as close to the Capitol as you could get, incredibly spacious. And Russell's dying set off this cascading process that created the opportunity for every other senator to move up into a better office.
Except for you. It was a cascading. It was all the way down for you.
That process had to take place before we knew what office we would wind up with, which was way over in the Dirksen, furthest corner of the Dirksen building.
The fourth floor broom closet of the Dirksen.
Yes, exactly. But it was just fine.
Right.
Anyway, it was an interesting process.
So you were up here. Did you get back to Georgia for the election, for election night, or were you still up here?
I was up here. Was I there for election night?
It would have been the primary, so it would have been September-ish.
I don't think so. I don't think I was there for the primary, but I was down. Gambrell and Nunn had a series of debates, I think 3 debates throughout the state, and I came down to travel with Senator Gambrell through those 3 debates.
Right, because there was a runoff because Ernie Vandiver was also running.
Correct.
In the primary.
Correct.
And then the runoff. When did you find out that Senator Gambrell was not going to win the nomination?
Gambrell, in the runoff, in the primary, Gambrell got 30-some-odd% of the vote. Nunn got probably 10 points less. So Gambrell had a significant lead over Nunn, but only in the low 30s, as I recall.
Magic number is 40% in runoffs.
Which was, and I was educated to that point, so I knew that it was going to be a tough battle. And I will recall a conversation that Gambrell and I were having as we were driving to a debate someplace in the world. Gambrell said, "Ted, what are we doing here? We're 2 Harvard lawyers riding through South Georgia about to debate Carl Vinson's nephew in a debate. This is uphill." So Gambrell knew that it was going to be a tough battle. Yeah.
Sure.
So that was my campaign experience.
Right.
I was with him during those runoffs, during those debates.
So there's a general election, and unlike years previous, the Democrat had legitimate opposition.
Indeed.
Sam Nunn was running against Congressman Fletcher Thompson, who had been one of those outspoken opponents of several civil rights issues that we were talking about: open housing, EEOC, school busing, things like that. Senator Nunn won. Did you ever consider staying on the staff for Senator Nunn, or?
No, I when I came to Washington in February '71, I viewed that as a temporary venture.
Right.
I wanted to be a lawyer. I mean,
Sure.
I had gone to the trouble of going to law school, and I had enjoyed the experience I had had in the Smythe Gambrell law firm, and I wanted to go back to practicing law. I was afraid that if I stayed in Washington much longer, that I would be basically moved from substantive law more into a lobbying role. And when I came out eventually, I didn't want to stay in,
Right.
and I didn't want to come out as a lobbyist. So David Gambrell quickly recruited me to come back to his law firm with him. I was very fond of David Gambrell.
Sure.
We had worked very closely together for a year and a half, so I wanted to just stay with him in his law practice.
And what sort of you had been a litigator at his father's law firm? What is this when you get into the municipal bond law?
I assumed when I went back with David Gambrell that David and I were going to be working in the litigation business law type area, which is what he had been doing
Right.
Before he left. But when I got to Gambrell and Mobley, I very quickly was asked to work on a municipal bond project. One of the very first pollution control bond financings was being done up at Plant Bartow, I think, in where is it? Up in northwest Georgia, and we were bond counsel. The Gambrell Mobley firm was bond counsel on that deal, and had never done a pollution control financing. So I was asked to help work on that, which was nice and challenging, and,
Sure.
and I enjoyed trying to figure out how to do it. And so I pretty quickly did that, and was not able to escape after that first one.
A victim of your own success.
Which was fine. I enjoyed the work, working with an awful lot of, bond counsel as a quarterback. If you talk to Jim Pinnell, he would have described the same thing. Jim became a bond lawyer himself. Your quarterback, local government officials and underwriters, and it's nice practice. So I didn't have complaints about it, but it still was not what I thought I was going to do. And Gambrell, as you know, did not have politics out of the system. He once again ran. He ran for governor in, what year would it have been? 76?
74.
6, I bet. You think?
6 would have been presidential election. Georgia's off year, so it would have been 74.
Was it?
70 and then 74.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So we went back in 72, and he was running for office in 74. So he was not engaged in full time in the practice of law, which
Sure.
is what I thought he was going to be doing. In any event, I had a number of friends that I had made through bar activity, particularly at King and Spalding, and was invited to move to King and Spalding in 77.
That answers that question.
Yeah.
So you were recruited, so a lateral move or a promotion?
Yes,
Lateral?
Yes.
And what sort of practice were you in when you moved to King and Spalding?
Tax exempt bond, and I continued doing that, and having gotten pretty well established in that area.
Yeah.
When I moved to Washington in 1983, I was very much engaged. I had really good relationships throughout the state of Georgia. I had been president of the Younger Lawyers section of the State Bar of Georgia, which gave me contacts with local attorneys throughout
Sure.
the state, which was important for a bond practice. And in addition, just a wonderful opportunity to get to know people throughout the state. So it was and I also got involved through this influence, frankly, that Gambrell had on me, active in the National Association of Bond Lawyers.
Okay.
And was ultimately president of the National Association. So I had a really nice established bond practice that obviously I could have continued if I'd wanted to, but
now this will betray my ignorance of the bond markets and bond law. Did you ever have any interaction with like the Solomon Brothers and the actual bond traders?
Oh, yes.
Because that would have been the heyday of Solomon Brothers, late 70s into the 80s.
No.
Okay.
They were an underwriting firm was involved in every bond transaction I was involved in. Solomon Brothers or Lehman or
Right.
whoever was, they were competing, for the local government business, trying to develop relationships with the local government.
I see.
So yes.
Yeah, okay.
But in any event, I was at went to King and Spalding in 77.
Right.
In 83, Griffin Bell, who had returned as having been Jimmy Carter's Attorney General, he had returned to King and Spalding, and was very much focused on King and Spalding growing. We had one office, the Atlanta office, and that was it. And Griffin Bell, having been here in Washington, wanted a Washington office. We opened a Washington office. It was limping along. Judge Bell asked if I would come to Washington to head the office in 1983, and I did that on the condition that Judge Bell, I'll do it as long as I can come back to Atlanta in 3 years. I'll come up and
doing some quick math over here.
Yeah, exactly. So I did have, once again, I thought I was on a temporary trip to Washington, but it didn't quite work out.
Potomac fever just caught you a little late.
I enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it, obviously, very much.
So Why did it take so long for King and Spalding to expand? The 70s, there was a lot of expansion in law firms opening offices in Washington. What was the reluctance on the part of King and Spalding, especially Jimmy Carter was in the White House? The time would have been ripe, 1977, 78.
There was no firm in the country that had a closer tie with Jimmy Carter. We had Griffin Bell, we had Charlie Curbo, we had Jack Watson, who came up as Secretary of the Cabinet. But we also had this incredible commitment to stay out of politics. And I think that had basically grown during the period of time that Jimmy Carter was governor. We had those partners who were active in the Carter campaign. We had a number of other partners who were questioning whether they were carrying their load while they were involved with the Carter campaign.
Right.
Maybe I'm exaggerating because I was a young lawyer and don't know what I'm talking about. But that's sort of my perception is that the Carter campaign, at King and Spalding, you were either in it or you were not in it. We had some partners who were very close to Carl Sanders, for example. So we had that Carter-Sanders tension in the firm. But in any event, the firm took a vote. The then management committee of the firm said, we will not accept any business that is politics related. That we indeed had a committee that evaluated,
Determined what?
Determined whether or not somebody was trying to hire us because of our ability to have influence at the White House, and we turned it down. Well, that was at the beginning of the Carter administration in '76. Griffin Bell came out of the Attorney General's office in '79 and wanted a Washington office, and
so he was the driving
force. He spoke, and we opened a Washington office, and it helped that our great client, the Coca-Cola Company, gave us the opportunity to do its food regulatory work if we developed the capability here in a Washington office. So that was a driving force. We opened an office, found some good food and drug expertise. The office was, we had a couple of lawyers, several lawyers in the office, but by '73, it was, okay, we either pulled the plug or we
83.
83,
okay.
Yes, indeed, thank you.
Yeah.
We either make it work or we close it up, and Griffin Bell says we're going to make it work. He says, I'll buy it myself and run it as a franchise if we're not closing the office. So
he probably would have done it too.
Griffin Bell was a big force at King and Spalding.
So where was the original office at? Was it here?
No. We went through 2 or 3 locations before we came.
I guess this would have been a little big for a small
we
operation.
We did a sublet from the firm that was then Kilpatrick and Cody. It's now, I forget, Kilpatrick something, but anyway.
Randy was with Kilpatrick and Cody.
Yes, he was.
While,
he was there.
I forget what.
Yeah, exactly.
What it is now.
Anyway, we sublet at 1800 M Street, just several blocks away. The 2 partners who came up from Atlanta in '79 found space in a small building over on I Street that we didn't lawyer ourselves adequately, because when we opened up, we discovered that the entryway was not an elegant lobby, but rather you entered down a subway, down a wheelchair ramp, past a Subway sandwich shop, with the aroma of onions wafting up through the building all day, and you could trip over the medical cases that held the urine and the blood samples and whatever. And anyway, once again, Griffin Bell intervened, and he was on the board of Martin Marietta at the time. Martin Marietta was out in Bethesda, and one day I was commuting regularly at the time. One day I was in that office, and Griffin Bell came storming in. Said, "Ted, this office is so awful. I made the driver let me out over on Pennsylvania Avenue because I had another director with me, and I was so embarrassed I didn't want him to see where our office was." So
Start taking his meetings in a hotel.
I accepted that as my assignment to go find office space, which in 1983 was actually in the building next door. We connect through
Sure.
to the 1730 building.
Okay. This is the Mills building
Yes,
now.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. I sublet the back half, in other words, this half of the 12th floor of the 1730 building, and put Griffin Bell in an office with precisely this view.
Okay.
The 1730 building, at the time, this building was only 9 stories
I
tall,
see.
so the 1730 building was over it.
That explains the architecture of
Yes.
the 9th floor.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it does. Anyway, Griffin Bell thought that was an appropriate location.
No urine and no Subway
Yeah,
sandwiches.
and anyway, by the end of, we moved into this space. By the end of 1983, we had 6 lawyers in the office. So that was King & Spalding's first venture outside Atlanta. We have over 200 lawyers here
Wow.
now, over 300 people. And we have 25 offices, I mean, having started that move out of Atlanta.
So I saw in the process of my research, you not only have a Washington office, but you also have a Northern Virginia office in Tyson's Corner.
Correct.
What? You can probably explain this to me. Why would you need somebody in Tyson's Corner if you've got Ted Hester and Company right here in Washington, D.C.?
To serve the clients that we have
Right.
out there. This was a lateral group that we acquired several years ago, very strong tech-oriented group.
A lot of defense
And they
contractors
are
out
out
that way.
with the defense contractors and the tech companies. They're there to serve their clients.
Sure,
That's what
sure.
it's about. Which is basically the case with all 25 of our offices.
Right. So you mentioned Coca-Cola and sort of FDA regulation, law, things like that. What other sorts of legal practices or issues have come up along the way since you've been here in '83?
So much. My practice, I left that tax exempt bond work
Right.
that I was doing in Atlanta, and my mentor, Griffin Bell, was very much in demand. There was no lawyer in the country with greater credibility. When a company really had a bet the company sort of issue, if you had a congressional committee investigating a tobacco company or a breast implant company or a Dalcon Shield manufacturer, Griffin Bell was a person to be considered. E.F. Hutton, some of your older viewers will remember E.F. Hutton, or the Exxon Valdez.
Oh yeah.
Oil
The
spills.
captain of the ship just passed away.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just saw that.
Anyway, Griffin Bell was just a great rainmaker. He really, a lot of people, a lot of companies with major problems wanted Griffin Bell on their team, and I had the wonderful luxury of second chairing him on congressional investigations, and so my practice developed through that relationship with Griffin Bell, and eventually Griffin Bell stopped coming up here, and I moved into the first chair. So that was my work. Griffin Bell also was, he developed a huge government investigations practice. We call it the special matters practice rather than white collar crime, because who wants to be represented by white collar crime lawyers? So we are special matters lawyers. And now have with those 200 lawyers
Right.
that I mentioned, we have a full service firm.
Sure.
We've a big international trade group, a big environmental practice, food and drug practice has continued to grow. Healthcare is a big practice that we have here.
Of course, one of your former colleagues is director of the FBI.
Exactly.
Was he was in this office?
He
Or
was in
Atlanta?
both offices. His family was in Atlanta when he was at King and Spalding.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
he had an office here. He was here a fair amount of the time.
Well, how would you, just as we start to wrap up, how would you describe the changes in Washington and changes in the law practice since the 1970s, 1980s to where we are now, sitting here in this beautiful room in September 2022?
Yeah. I probably could address the changes in Congress and politics and fundraising and those sorts of things more than, when David Gambrell and I were working in the Senate, it was a collegial place. Gambrell was sufficiently moderate that he kind of was almost bipartisan and was able to work across the aisle readily. That continued when Sam Nunn was in Congress. As you know,
Right.
Sam Nunn eventually, when he left the Senate in 97.
You got it.
He came here to King and Spalding.
Yep.
I maintained a relationship with Senator Nunn while he was in the Senate, and it was clear that Senator Nunn did not go to Georgia every weekend. He was. I'm not sure he was drinking whiskey at the bar at the end of the night.
We can ask him, though.
But he and his wife had friends, very close friends, among other senators. I mean,
Sure.
Members of Congress stayed here a lot more then than they do today. Today they basically come in Tuesday morning and leave Thursday afternoon and are fundraising every night that they're here, and it's just it's an awful how we get any policy done.
Well, and to
is
talk about
remarkable
the
to me.
Senate is the term regular order is thrown around a lot, in that there is no such thing as regular order
You're
anymore.
exactly right.
It seems to be governing by crisis, and the there's far more reconciliation than there used to be, because it seems like that's the only thing, the only way to move it.
There was bipartisanship until 20 years ago. I mean, it's been going downhill pretty fast. But you ask Sam Nunn, he would tell you that working with Dick Lugar and Goldwater and others, he was able to accomplish a lot. I mean, to accomplish anything, you needed to do it on a bipartisan, anything significant, you needed to do it on a bipartisan basis, and that was possible when I was here,
Right.
in the 70s. There is no bipartisanship. I mean, and it affects the whole community. You ask about Washington. Well,
Yeah.
you're either. It's hard to be a centralist. You're either a Democrat or a Republican, and there are those of us who think of ourselves as moderate and in the middle, but it's not easy.
It's a pretty uncomfortable
It's
place
not
to
easy
be.
to avoid taking a stance. I mean, you're either in the Democratic camp or the Republican camp, and it's hard to be neutral.
And I can imagine that has only gotten worse in the last 5 or 6 years.
Correct. Very much so.
So usually I ask if folks would rather work in the Senate now or back when they worked, but I think that already answers that.
I think you know
I think
that
that
answer.
answers that question.
I would have no interest in working there today.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say to young lawyers who say, I want to be a lawyer, I don't want to be a lobbyist, but I want to work in Washington, D.C. Is that something you would still counsel young attorneys that there's good work to be done?
Absolutely. We always, and Griffin Bell, once again, I quote him a lot here. Bell thought it was important for lawyers to engage in public service. Bell he practiced law. He very much involved in Georgia politics, supported John Kennedy for president, was
Right.
appointed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, came off the court back to King and Spalding, appointed by Carter as Attorney General, back to King and Spalding. So he was in and out of government.
Right.
And he liked that pattern and has encouraged and supported. So we have lawyers, we have any number of former U.S. attorneys or assistant U.S. attorneys here in the firm. So the Justice Department in particular is kind of an in and out for us, but also trade lawyers working in the Commerce Department or the U.S. Trade Commission or various places, the ITC.
Now, you were talking about how in Washington it feels like you have to be red team, blue team. Law firms certain law firms are like that too. There are Democratic firms, there are Republican firms. Does King and Spalding try to still maintain, I guess, a balance, or at least a semblance of an attempted balance?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have, and we maintain civility among ourselves. I mean, we have lawyers in this firm who came out of Republican administrations, out of Democratic administrations, and we work together to give the clients the benefit of all those perspectives. So yes, we pride ourselves in our government advocacy team, and we have former Republican members and former Democratic members.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I knew Senator Nunn, who you mentioned, but also Senator Connie Mack was a longtime partner here. Who are some of the other former members?
Former senator, ambassador, and director of DIC, director of director.
Coates. It's got to be Dan Coates.
Yes,
then.
is Dan Coates, director.
Director of National Intelligence. DNI?
DNI, yes.
Yeah.
Director
All
of
right.
National Intelligence.
Our
exactly.
powers combined.
Yeah. So Dan Coates is with us. Andrew Crenshaw, who was at the University of Georgia at the same time I was, but went back to his home in Jacksonville, Florida, and represented Jacksonville in the House for many years.
Right.
Is with us. Kendrick Meek,
right.
a Democrat whose mother was a member of Congress representing the Miami, Florida area. Kendrick is now, he was in Congress, head of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Right.
And is now with us now.
I think you ran against Marco Rubio in 2010.
Yes.
And
correct.
Charlie Crist.
You're good. You've got those down pat.
I'm a historian. I just have to memorize dates. That's all I have to do.
Former Maryland Republican Governor Bob Ehrlich,
right,
is with us. Until the current governor was, I think, the only Republican ever to be elected statewide to anything in Maryland. So.
For a pretty long time.
Yeah, exactly.
And if polling is correct, it'll probably be another long while, but who knows, right? Yeah. Well, Ted, is there anything else you'd like to record for posterity before we wrap it up here?
Nothing that occurs to me. It was a great experience. I guess I should say, while I would not, I had the luxury of working in the Senate in 71, 72, and working with someone who needed me really badly and was relying on me. I would still recommend if one of our young lawyers came to me and said, look, I have an opportunity to go work particularly on a Senate or House committee doing the substantive work of a committee, what do you think? I would say do it. It's a great opportunity. It will only serve you well when you want to come back out and practice law. It's good experience. So it was good experience then, and it would still be good experience today.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Ted. Thank you so much on behalf for Robert Lay and I, on behalf of everybody at the Russell Library. Thank you very much. And if anybody's interested in doing research on Senator Gambrell, his papers are at the Richard B. Russell Library. I'm sure you can probably read some of the memos that Ted wrote and dictated himself. So thank you very much, Ted Hester.
Thank you.